Betrayal at the bar, she left with my friend. But I snagged myself a fresh start. Caught my girl Olivia with my best friend Bob at our favorite country bar. Talk about a gut punch. After the heartbreak, I found something real. I walked into my favorite country bar, spotted an empty table in the far corner, and settled in. Ordered myself a sandwich, some fries, and a beer. I sat there, eyes glued to the TV, where a show about country music was playing. They were talking about the old stars, most of them long gone, though a few were still kicking. There was something kinda melancholic about it. Stories of legends, their rough lives, the poverty they clawed their way out of, thanks to music. While I was chowing down, my best buddy Bob strolled in with Olivia. That hit me like a punch to the gut, 'cause I thought Olivia was my girl. I'd asked her to hang out tonight, but she said she was meeting some friends and suggested we catch up tomorrow instead. We'd been together for 6 months, spending nearly every weekend side by side. I was falling for her hard, and she'd said she felt the same. We'd even tossed around the idea of getting engaged, but figured there was no rush since things were going so smooth. The TV show wrapped up, and someone fired up the jukebox. Crazy started playing, right at the second verse. I knew you'd love me as long as you wanted, and then someday you'd leave me for somebody new. And that's when it hit me. What if that somebody new was Bob? The worst part, he knew how I felt about Olivia. Guess guy code didn't mean squat to him. I marched over to their table. They looked up, and Bob jumped in. Charlie, I cut him off. Shut it, Bob. If we cross paths again, one of us is ending up in the ER. Then I turned to Olivia, cool as I could manage, and said, I'm disappointed in you. We're done. You've shown me who you really are. With that, I spun around and walked out. Next day, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. It was Olivia, but I wasn't in the mood to talk. Later, it rang again. Bob this time. I picked up. What do you want, Bob? Charlie, I'm sorry. You know I've always liked Olivia. We'd chat at work. I asked her to hang out, and she said yes. Hold up. You knew she was my girl, and you still went for it? How many times did you two meet up? Charlie, it was just 3 times. We started catching feelings. And what about Alice? I shot back. Did you tell her? She deserves better than you, Bob. I'm done with both you and Olivia. You two are perfect for each other. I slammed the phone down. Alice was Bob's girl. The 3 of us, Bob, Alice, and me, all worked at the same factory. And how we all met? Well, that's a story for another day. Not long after, my phone rang again. Olivia, I decided to pick up. What do you want? Charlie, I'm sorry. Bob asked me out a few times, and I finally said yes, but it didn't mean anything. Stop lying. I talked to Bob. He said you two met up at least 3 times. Probably more than that, I bet. Is this about money? Silence. Well, good luck to you both. You're both greedy as heck. You deserve each other. I don't give a rip about either of you. The only one I feel bad for is Alice. She thought you were her friend. Don't call me again. I grew up in Kentucky, in a big family with 8 brothers and sisters. I was the oldest. In high school, I played football, offensive lineman, 6'3", 260 pounds. Senior year, I snagged an athletic scholarship to a college in Ohio. My folks couldn't afford tuition, so that scholarship was my only shot. I dreamed of becoming a mechanical engineer. Always loved working with my hands. I was a bit of a quiet guy by nature, but I treated girls right. My sisters taught me to respect women, and my mom used to say, treat girls how you'd want your sisters treated. That's when I met Bob. He was outgoing, not much of an athlete, but he'd drop hints in conversation that his family had money. Not right now, but he'd have an inheritance someday. He was studying business management. When I wasn't training, we'd hang out. Bob was a natural with girls, always had a crowd around him at parties. I was shyer, but thanks to him, I got some attention too. On my own, I probably wouldn't have figured out how to talk to girls. After graduation, I stayed in Ohio and landed a job as a mechanical engineer at Ford Motor Company. Pay was decent, so I rented a small apartment near the plant and picked up a used but solid pickup truck. Every month, I'd save some cash and send $500 back home to help my parents. My dad was a miner, and I've always been tight with my family. Bob got a job in the same city too, at a warehouse supplying parts to our Ford plant. Over time, he worked his way up to warehouse manager. We still spent weekends together. One day, he told me he was dating a girl from work, Alice, who handled inventory control. He introduced us, and honestly, I could have fallen for her right then and there. But Bob and I had this ironclad rule: no messing with each other's girls. It wasn't easy, but I stuck to it. I dated a few women from the plant. Nothing serious, though. Couldn't do double dates with Bob. Being around Alice was too tough. She was always sweet to me. Then Bob invited me to his company's Christmas party. Since they were our suppliers, I figured, why not? That's where I met Olivia. Gorgeous, curvy, a total knockout. Unlike Alice, she dressed flashy and flirted hard. She said she worked with Bob and Alice, secretary to one of the bosses. We hit it off, talked all night, then danced till the party wound down. We agreed to meet up again and rang in New Year's with Bob and Alice. Alice said she was happy I'd found someone, but you could tell she didn't mean it. That night, I brought Olivia back to my place. Let's just say, she was pretty darn impressive, if you catch my drift. Next morning, she was surprised at how basic my apartment was. I told her I'd just started my job, didn't need much, plus I send part of my paycheck to my family. Said I'd think about getting fancy stuff someday, but not yet. Then she asked about Bob's family, if it was true they had money. I said yeah, they're loaded, paid for his college and all that. Our relationship took off fast. Olivia and I were hitting the town almost every weekend, having a blast, just soaking up time together. I was falling for her deep, and it seemed like she was right there with me. We did everything as a pair, and man, things got steamy in the bedroom. But one thing bugged me: her constant flirting and all that talk about money. I tried convincing her we could have a solid future anyway, but whenever we went on double dates with Bob and Alice, I'd catch this weird vibe between us. Couldn't put my finger on it, but it didn't feel good. Update 1. Olivia and I had been together about 6 months, talking about the future, even tossing around the idea of getting engaged. She'd say there was no rush, though. One day, we hit up a fair, and I spotted a booth with cheap jewelry, picked up a ring and told her it was a stand-in, a sign she was mine until we were ready for the real deal. She grinned and slipped it on. Oh, and I'd started hitting the gym 3 times a week after work. Dropped down to 230 pounds and felt awesome. Then came that night at the country bar. Seeing my girl and my best friend locking lips, that was a gut punch. After that blowout at the bar and the phone call, I cut them both off. Yeah, I was ticked off, but I really felt for Alice. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. Charlie, I'm so sorry about you and Olivia. I figured she might pull something shady, but I never thought it'd be with Bob. Alice, you saying she's been with other guys at work too? I've seen her lunching with her boss, Brad, all the time, but I wasn't sure if it meant anything. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't have proof. Then I found out about her and Bob. Cut ties with them the second I knew. It's rough seeing them at work, but I'm managing. Alice, thanks for calling. I was worried about you. You're one of my closest friends. Want to grab a drink sometime? I'd love that, Charlie. After that chat, I wasn't sure if I felt better or worse. A couple more weeks passed. One evening, I swung by the grocery store and ran into Alice. Hey Charlie, good to see you. How you holding up? Doing okay? You back in the dating game yet? She smiled. Turned down a few offers, 'cause I'm waiting on someone specific. Don't want to mess it up if he calls. Oh shoot, I was just about to ask. Want to go out? Yeah, I do. You're the one I was waiting for. When and where? I gotta know how to dress. Saturday, my favorite country bar. I'll pick you up at 6 hour. We said bye, and when I rolled up to get her, she looked killer: jeans, vest, cowboy hat, boots, full on Western vibe. I opened the truck door. She hopped in. Saturdays at the bar meant a live country band. We grabbed a table, ordered beers, and had an hour before the music kicked off. So we just chilled and talked. Turns out Alice was from Kentucky too, the county next to mine. She went to college there, applied for jobs, and ended up at the factory in Ohio. Conversation flowed easy. It was nice being around her again. She asked if this was the same bar where I caught Bob and Olivia. I said yeah, but I wasn't letting those two ruin my spot. She just smiled. When the band started, we hit the dance floor. Slow songs came first, letting couples ease in. Then it picked up. Alice and I sat out the fast stuff. I admitted I'm not big on quick dancing, but love watching the ladies move. Then the MC called the girls up for line dancing, and even some guys joined. You gonna go? I teased. You just want to check out my moves, huh? She laughed, then strutted out there. When the dance kicked off, I couldn't take my eyes off her. She caught my stare, gave her hips an extra shake, and I grinned, clapping along. She came back with a sly smile. I leaned in for a kiss, but pulled back. Sorry, don't be, she said, kissing me again. We had a blast, danced, downed a couple more beers, and time flew. For the last song, I pulled Alice close, swaying to the beat. As it faded, I kissed her, then drove her home, asked if she'd want to hang out next Saturday, maybe hit Cedar Point, this big amusement park in Ohio. She was all in, and we kissed goodnight. I didn't want to rush things on our first date, but I felt on top of the world all week at work. Friday, I called to confirm. She'd heard of the park, but never been. Saturday morning, I picked her up, and we headed out. On the drive, we chatted, and I asked if she'd told Bob or Olivia we were seeing each other. She said she hadn't spoken to them since finding out about their mess. We had a killer time, rode roller coasters, hit up other rides, and checked out some shows around the park. On the way back, we decided to grab dinner at Texas Roadhouse. By the time we got home, we were both totally wiped out. Alice lived with her roommate, Joan, a cool lady in her 50s, who worked at a store. Alice said she really valued Joan's company. She'd become like family to her, and they got along great. I told Alice I'd be heading out of town for the weekend, but wanted to see her the following week. She said she'd love that and told me to give her a call when I got back. When I got home, I didn't waste any time. I called her up and invited her to an important dinner. My boss was throwing an anniversary party for his marriage, and it was happening at the Hilton. I mentioned I'd booked a room for the night, since there'd be a lot of drinking, but I made it clear I wasn't pressuring her to come if she wasn't up for it. Charlie, I'd love to go with you, she said, and let's get one thing straight. We don't need 2 beds. I want you to know I'm falling for you. Just promise me you'll be honest and won't break my heart. I told her, I'd never hurt you, and I won't let anyone else do it either. Hey Alice, how about we take your car? I don't want to roll up to this thing in my pickup. She grinned. Sure, we'll take mine. I'll let Joan know I won't be home tonight. I left my truck at her place, and we headed to the event in her car. We got there early to chill and get ready in the hotel room. On the drive, Alice opened up about thinking of switching jobs. She wasn't comfy seeing Bob and Olivia every day at work. She'd also heard a rumor that Olivia might be pregnant. I changed in the bathroom, threw on my tux, and when I stepped into the bedroom, I froze. Alice looked unreal. She had on this tight blue dress that hugged her figure perfectly, her hair cascading over her shoulders. She was classy and drop-dead gorgeous. You look like a goddess, I said, barely able to take my eyes off her. I don't even care about this dinner anymore. She smirked. Oh no, you don't. I spent way too long getting ready just to change back now. We laughed and headed downstairs to the party. When we arrived, my boss and his wife greeted us warmly. He introduced us to his wife and welcomed us in. As they walked off, I caught him sneaking a glance at Alice. Since I knew a bunch of the guests, I started introducing her to people I recognized. She got tons of compliments. We grabbed drinks and snagged a table. There were plenty of appetizers, with dinner coming later. Alice spotted a few women she knew from work. She dealt with them a lot in inventory control. Meanwhile, I walked over to Mary, the head of HR, and struck up a convo. Mary, got any openings in inventory control or supply chain? I asked. Actually, yeah. Janie's retiring next month, and I'm in charge of finding her replacement. Got someone in mind? Yup, my date. You just met her, Alice. She's in inventory control now and loves it, but she's ready for something new. Mary nodded. Tell her to swing by my office Monday. I'll set up an interview. She seems awesome, by the way. Thanks, Mary. I really appreciate it, I said. She chuckled. I'm sure you do. The party was a blast. I danced with some of the employees' wives, and Alice danced with their husbands. But we spent most of the night tearing up the dance floor together. The food was killer. Roast beef, chicken, shrimp, and all kinds of sides. After a couple of cocktails, we said goodbye to the hosts and headed back to the room. Alice, you sure about this? I don't want you thinking I'm taking advantage, I said. She cut me off. Charlie, stop overthinking it. Just be with me. I helped her out of her dress, hung it up next to my tux, and we climbed into bed. You get the picture. I turned off the lights. We cuddled up, and as we drifted off, the last thing I heard was her whispering, I love you. I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee. Alice had already showered, gotten dressed, and made us each a cup. Morning, Charlie. Sleep well? She asked. Best sleep I've had in forever, I said. After a quick shower and some coffee, we joined the other guests for breakfast. People were smiling at us, and I leaned over to Alice. Looks like everyone knows we're a thing now. Mary walked by, winked at Alice, and said, See you Monday. After she left, Alice gave me a confused look. What was that about? Oh, forgot to mention. You've got an interview Monday. You said you were thinking about a job switch, right? Her eyes welled up, and she whispered, Charlie, I hope this isn't a dream. I love you so much. We talked the whole drive home. Alice, hope I'm not rushing things, but in 2 weeks, I'm heading to my parents' place in Kentucky. I'd love for you to come with me. I'm leaving Friday night and coming back Sunday. We could swing by your folks too if you want. I'd love to, she said. But my parents are pretty old school, so we'd probably have to sleep in separate rooms. Don't worry, I'm sure everything's gonna be fine, I said with a grin. Update 2. We hit the road for Kentucky. On the way, Alice spilled the latest gossip. Word was Bob and Olivia were tying the knot next month because Olivia couldn't hide her pregnancy anymore. She probably thinks she's marrying into money, Alice said, but she'll figure out soon enough it's not Bob's cash, it's his parents'. Yeah, he lives large, but it's mostly on borrowed dime. When we pulled up to my parents' place, we were greeted by this big old house with tons of bedrooms and bathrooms. My brothers and sisters, who still lived there, ran out to meet us, followed by Mom and Dad. I hugged everyone and introduced Alice. She got a bunch of warm hugs right off the bat. We spent a few hours chatting, and I could tell my family was already crazy about her. She was checking out the photos on the wall and lingered on some shots of me in my old football uniform. I noticed tears in her eyes. Alice, you okay? What's up? Charlie, you remember that away game? 2 guys tried dragging a girl in a yellow sweater into the tunnel. You stepped in, knocked one down, tackled the other, and told them if they ever came near her again, they'd regret it. Then you just walked off to the locker room. Yeah, I remember that, I said, but I never told anyone about it. How'd you know? Charlie, that girl was me. I never saw your face, just the number 67 on your jersey. I tried finding you after, but no one knew who you were. All I got was your name, Charles. I was waiting by the tunnel for my friend when those 2 grabbed me and pulled me in. They said they just wanted some fun, and I screamed for them to let me go. Then you showed up. They never bothered me again after that. She leaned in and kissed me. When Bob first introduced us, something clicked. Now I get why you felt so familiar. Guess the one good thing Bob ever did was bring us together. Mom set Alice up in a separate bedroom and sent me down to the basement where there was an extra bed. But around 1 a.m., Alice snuck down to me. We hung out. Yeah, it was a little tricky down there. And about an hour later, she slipped back to her room. The next day, we headed to Alice's family. She'd never mentioned her parents were loaded. Their house was straight up fancy. Alice has two younger sisters, both super pretty and a few years younger than her. She introduced me as her boyfriend, and I caught one of her sisters, Sandy, whispering to her, "He's hot too." We went inside, chatted a bit, and soon her dad, Hank, pulled me aside for a serious talk. "What do you do? What's your background?" he asked. I could tell he was protective of his little girl. I looked him in the eye and said, "Mr. Carter, I want to talk to you about marrying your daughter. I'm asking for your blessing." Alice wasn't expecting that. Her eyes filled with tears, and she stared at me shocked. "We haven't been together long," I said, "but our love's real. We know we can build a happy life together." Hank glanced at Alice. "You love Charlie?" "Yes, Dad, with all my heart." "Then you've got my blessing," he said, "but on one condition, the wedding's gotta be here in Kentucky, so your mom and I can throw you a proper celebration. And don't worry, we're covering everything." I surprised everyone when I pulled a ring out of my pocket, got down on one knee, and proposed to Alice right there. She said, "Yes," kissed me, then ran to hug her dad and mom, who was tearing up with joy. We all got up from the table and enjoyed an awesome dinner together. Back at my parents' place, we broke the engagement news to Mom and Dad. They were over the moon. That evening, some nearby relatives came over for a barbecue. Dad proudly took over grill duties, while Mom handled the meat and sides. Alice jumped in to help in the kitchen, saying she loved cooking. All my relatives stopped by to say hi to me and meet Alice. Alice was the first woman I ever brought home to meet the family. Everyone kept saying she was the one and told me to hold on to her tight. After a full day of fun and catching up, we said goodbye to the fam, promising to let them know the wedding date soon. Before heading to bed, Alice whispered to me that Mom had warned her about the shoes on the stairs. Turns out, she'd accidentally knocked some boots down the steps. She tried to apologize, but Mom just smiled and said, "I was young once too. That's partly why I've got so many kids." Later that night, Alice snuck downstairs again. We hung out quietly, tried not to make noise, but you know how it goes. She didn't slip back to her room until 5 a.m. The next morning, Mom and Alice swapped these sneaky little grins over breakfast. After a big, hearty homemade meal, we hugged my parents goodbye and hit the road home. On Monday, Alice had her HR interview. By Tuesday, Mary called her up. She got the job and could put in her notice. She rang me to share the news, but I already had the scoop. We decided to celebrate with dinner at my favorite country bar. Over steaks, Alice told me, Bob and Olivia had jetted off to Vegas for a 2-week vacation to tie the knot. She said those were the best 2 weeks at work since she didn't have to deal with them. Her coworkers were bummed she was leaving, but they knew it was a step up. The Ford gig was one of the best paying jobs around, and she was proud she'd nailed the interview and landed it. Alice kept our engagement under wraps, but before she left her old job, she dropped a note on Bob's desk. It was short and sweet. "Might want to get a DNA test when the kid's born. Your wife sure had a lot of lunches with her boss." She ended it with a congrats, but didn't sign it. From day one, at the new job, Alice couldn't stop smiling. When guy coworkers tried asking her out, she'd flash her ring and proudly say she was engaged to me. No one pushed it further. Joan, her roommate, stepped up to help with wedding planning. She'd become a real friend to Alice. Joan had a married daughter, and they'd swap tips all the time. I'd swing by a couple times a week to pitch in with the prep. One day, I asked Mom to make a list of relatives and friends we wanted to invite. She didn't just make the list. She ordered the invites and handled sending them out too. We locked in a wedding date 4 months out. Alice hashed it all out with her mom, and her family took charge, booked a church and a big spot for the reception. Her mom, Sophie, offered to send out invites for their side. With Alice's dad, Hank, being a big deal around town, you knew it was going to be something special. Alice's family had a ton of friends and connections. I was pretty nervous, but honestly, I ended up doing the least out of everyone. At work, I asked some coworkers if they'd want to come to my wedding in Kentucky, and to my surprise, a bunch of them said yes. Joan found a seamstress to make Alice's wedding dress, and she confirmed that she and her daughter would definitely be at the ceremony. Later, Sophie called us to say she'd lined up a caterer and asked us to nail down the guest count closer to the date. She also mentioned Hank had booked a killer band. Everything was falling into place perfectly. I turned to Alice. Don't you think we're going a little overboard with all this? This wedding's gonna cost a fortune. Charlie, this is all my parents' idea, she said. They've been dreaming of a big wedding like this since me and my sisters were little. Trust me, my sisters are gonna get the same treatment. It's their thing. How come you never told me your family's loaded? I asked. I didn't want you to love me for that. I wanted you to love me for me. They only ever told Joan Bob doesn't even know. Does it change anything for you? Nah, I'm into you, not your bank account. If it makes you feel better, I'd sign a prenup. Charlie, we don't need that, she laughed. I know we're in this forever. Besides, I don't have much money right now. Maybe someday if I get an inheritance. But for now, all I've got is a loving guy who's got my back. Alice started putting together the wedding party list. Her dad was set to walk her down the aisle. Her older sister stepped up as maid of honor, and her younger sister joined as a bridesmaid. She asked my two married sisters to be bridesmaids too, and their husbands became groomsmen. My younger brothers got paired up with Alice's sisters, and my youngest brother took on best man duties. My niece was thrilled to be the flower girl, and my nephew got the gig as ring bearer. Everyone said yes without blinking. Alice was crushing it at her new job. Everyone loved and respected her. What's not to like? But we hit a snag. She'd only been there 4 months and didn't have paid time off yet. We brainstormed options and figured we could leave Friday night, get married Saturday, and be back by Sunday. It'd be a whirlwind, but we didn't have much choice. 2 weeks before the wedding, my plant manager called me into his office. We were tight, and he'd even said he was coming to the ceremony. Charlie, I heard you're stressing about wedding dates. Mary told me you're planning to head out Friday, tie the knot Saturday, and rush back Sunday, right? Yeah, Mark, that's the plan. Alice doesn't have vacation days yet. Well, tell your soon-to-be wife she's got paid leave from Thursday through the next week. Oh, and one more thing. I've got a gift for you 2 tickets for a 4-day cruise for your honeymoon. Mark, thank you. She's gonna flip, I said, shaking his hand. I bolted to Alice's office and told her we were grabbing lunch because I had big news. At the restaurant, she looked at me. Charlie, what's up? What's this about? Mark called me. You've got paid time off from Thursday through next week. No more rushing the wedding. And get this, he gave us a 4-day cruise for our honeymoon. I slid the tickets across the table, and her eyes teared up. Everything was set. Now we could head to Kentucky on Thursday, which made planning way easier. The rehearsal dinner went down Friday night. I asked my dad if he needed any cash. He said ever since we announced the wedding, he'd been saving up the money I sent him. It hit me again how much I respect and admire that man. After the rehearsal dinner, I kissed Alice and told her I'd see her tomorrow. She'd given her mom the guest count for the wedding and reception, but kept it from me. She knew I was already a bundle of nerves. I figured it'd be all my brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, and their families anyway. I'd heard nearby hotels were booked solid months ago. Hope our guests found a spot to crash. Saturday morning, I woke up and Mom insisted I eat breakfast. No way was I tackling this big day on an empty stomach. Over food, she told me she and Dad had met the Carters and thought they were awesome people who spoke really highly of me. After breakfast, I showered, shaved, and slipped into my white tux to match Alice's dress. My brothers rocked black tuxes, and all four of them were in the wedding party. Time to head to the church. The church was about 30 kilometers away. Pretty big place. My brother mentioned it could hold over 600 people. As guests started rolling in, me and my brothers helped them find seats. A lot of them told me I didn't need to bother, but I insisted. I had to keep busy somehow. Joan showed up with her daughter, and I sat them with Alice's family. I greeted relatives I hadn't seen in years and was stoked to spot some coworkers in the crowd. My boss, Mark, even flew in with his wife. Then someone told me to head to the altar. Alice's limo had pulled up, and tradition says the groom can't see the bride till the ceremony starts. I chatted with my parents a bit more while the organist kicked off some tunes. After a few songs, they announced it was time for guests to take their seats. The wedding was about to begin. I walked up to the altar and stood next to the pastor. First down the aisle was Sandy, Alice's younger sister, with my brother. They looked amazing. Then Maria, her other sister, came down with my second brother. After them, my married brothers walked with their wives. My nephew followed, carrying the rings like a champ. Two guys rolled out a white runner, and my niece skipped down it, tossing rose petals. The music shifted, everyone stood, and the wedding march started. Alice appeared in the doorway, her dad leading her by the arm. She looked unreal, like an angel. I felt tears streaming down my face. "Who gives this woman to this man?" the pastor asked. "Her mother and I," her dad replied. "We said our vows." I slid the ring on her finger, and then I got the green light to kiss the bride. I kissed her, and it was the happiest moment of my life. "Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce Mr. and Mrs. Jones," the pastor announced. The crowd jumped up, cheering and clapping. We headed to the church doors with the wedding party to thank everyone for coming. It took over half an hour for the place to clear out, as guests started heading to the reception hall. When we got to the banquet hall, drinks and appetizers were already out. The band started playing, but no one hit the dance floor yet. Tables were set up around it, and as soon as we walked in, the whole room stood and gave us a loud welcome. We took our seats, and Alice's dad said a few words before kicking off dinner. They had buffet tables on both sides, so everyone could grab food fast. Alice and I got served first, but we were probably the last to finish eating. Every time someone clinked their glass with a spoon, which happened like every 10 seconds, we had to kiss. Then they moved some tables aside to make room for dancing. Alice and I kicked it off on the dance floor. The wedding party joined in, and soon all the guests were out there too. The party went on for 4 hours. It was hands down an incredible day. Epilogue. We had a blast on the cruise. When we got back home, we started house hunting and ended up finding this awesome 3-bedroom place with a hot tub. For the first couple of weeks, we crashed at my tiny apartment, but Alice felt like we needed more space. We checked in with Joan to see if she'd be okay on her own without Alice, but she assured us she was fine financially and just loved looking out for her. "That's my job now," I said. Every night, we'd write thank you cards to our wedding guests. I think we're almost done with that. We also grab lunch together at work, 3 times a week. It's been 3 months since the wedding, and things are going great. We don't fight. We just talk through any hiccups and sort them out. People always say communication's the key to a solid marriage, and we're all about that advice. One day, Alice told me a friend from her old job called her with some tea. Olivia had found out Bob was drowning in debt. Plus, there was a rumor floating around that someone told Bob to get a DNA test when the baby's born. Nobody knew where it came from. A few weeks later, another call from her old workplace. Bob and Olivia were hitting rough patches. Turns out, Bob did the DNA test, and it showed he's not the kid's dad. Wild, right? Thanks for checking out my story. So, that's where the tale ends. I see comments on stories like this all the time. Stuff like, "Oh, this is totally made up," or "An AI wrote this, huh?" Look, I don't write or make up stories myself. No way. And sure, I can't 100% swear every story's legit and not cooked up by someone. People can say whatever happened to them, but there's no guarantee they didn't just dream it up. With this one, though, yeah, I think it's probably fiction. It's all too neat, too perfect to be real life. What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for sticking around till the end of this video. Check out our last one, you'll see it right here. Catch you later, and take care.